Historians look very kindly on this republic for the few. For them, senatorial plutocracy is more acceptable and less threatening than proletarian egalitarianism. They embrace Cicero, a self-enriching slaveholder, slumlord, ruling class mouthpiece, executioner, and senatorial oligarch. They embrace Cicero as a champion of liberty who opposed Julius Caesar and who refused to live under a tyranny. And when I say they, I mean really about 95% of all present-day historians of ancient Rome are Cicero supporters. Only a handful, Arthur Kaplan, G.M. de Saint Croix, me, if I qualify as historian, a few others, only a handful are sympathetic to the populares and the Democrats. What does that say about our educational systems and our universities? Cicero, that great champion of Republican liberty, deplored such things as the secret ballot. He said the secret ballot makes it easier for the common people to act independently and do mischief. A year after Caesar was murdered in 44 BC, Cicero, who was, by the way, not among the assassins, but fully applauded the deed, fully supported it, he wrote to Brutus and to other associates, calling for a ruthless bloodletting, a final solution against the Democrats. I do not admit any doctrine of mercy. There should be a salutary severity, for if we are going to be merciful, civil wars will never cease. We need extreme measures, unquote. One is reminded of Cicero's own role as consul 20 years earlier in 63 BC, when he whipped up an anti-subversion witch-hunting campaign against reformers in the Senate, and then ordered without trial the summary execution of 5 people he charged with conspiracy against the state. It's called the Catiline Conspiracy, on the basis, by the way, of very dubious and trumped-up evidence. Few modern-day historians pass severe judgment on this atrocity. H.H. Scullard, a leading classicist, sets the tone by allowing that Cicero may have been, quote, over-hasty, but he had good reason to feel he had done his duty. Indeed, he had saved his country, unquote. Behind this willingness, ladies and gentlemen, to repress popular forces is a chronic fear of the democratic excesses of the people. I'm not talking about Cicero, I'm talking about Scullard and his associates. We can understand Cicero, he's an aristocrat and all that. But there's that same fear of democratic excesses. There is fear of the people mobilizing and agitating. They need to be curbed by upper-class men of moderation and probity. Upper-class moderation and probity are ingredients, I would suggest, that exist more in the minds of gentlemen historians than in actual history. Nothing said about who curbs those at the top, those who actually have the actual power and are continually abusing it. The best known and probably the greatest populares leader was Julius Caesar. Although thanks to the way history is retailed, few of us know of him in this role. Here are some of the things Caesar did in his 6 or 7 consulships and then later on after the Civil War. Once in power as consul, he founded new settlements for veterans of his army and for 80,000 of Rome's proletarians. He distributed some of the best lands near Rome and elsewhere to 20,000 poor families that had 3 or more children. Caesar sent many unemployed proletarians to repair ancient cities in the colonies, or he slated them for employment on public works within Rome. He directed large landholders to have at least 1/3 of their laborers to be freemen rather than slaves. So every latifundio owner had to have 1/3 of his workforce had to be free labor rather than slave labor. And this was a rule that would compel payment of wages and thereby somewhat diminish the landowner's high accumulation rate, and it would also reduce unemployment and crime. In an attempt to secure affordable housing for poor tenants, Caesar remitted a whole year of rent for low to moderate dwellings. Following Gaius Gracchus and other populares, Caesar increased duties on luxury imports. First, that was to encourage Italian domestic industry, and second, to make the rich pay something pay something to the state for the obscenely lavish lifestyles they were enjoying. Caesar attempted to impose honest administration in the provinces, where subject peoples were prey to rapacious governors and visiting senators. He saved some of the provincials from the pitiless tax collectors. He capped the tax rates, he fixed the tax rates, and he eliminated the self-enriching middlemen. He ejected from the Senate all those associated with provincial plunder. He eased the desperate burden of a vast debtor class by allowing repayment of debts at lower pre-war prices. He abolished the fines that were put on debtors when they couldn't meet their payments. He ordered that all the interest people had already paid was to be applied to reducing the principal they owed. Oh, if only we could get banks to do that today. He canceled all debt interest that had accumulated over several years. This last measure alone, Suetonius estimates, erased 1/4 of all debts, a serious loss for rich creditors. By the way, there were two theories as to why people fall into debt. One of them is that many are deprived of adequate income and are subjected to heartless taxes, and so unable to earn enough or keep enough of what they earn, they're forced to borrow on their future labor. As their debt obligations accumulate and more of their income goes into interest payments, they have even less for their own needs, and they're forced to borrow still more. Caught in this deepening cycle, they're forced to sell their small holdings and sometimes even themselves or their children into servitude. By the way, he abolished that. Individuals could no longer sell themselves into servitude if they were in debt. Human natural right and sovereignty could not be treated commensurate with property. Such was the plight of many, by the way, in the late Republic, and such has been the case throughout history. Today we witness whole nations caught in a deepening cycle of debt, selling off the land and labor of future generations to international investors at very unfavorable terms to the debtor nations. There's a second theory. The second theory tells us that people go into debt because they're irresponsible spendthrifts who try to live off thrifty creditors. In that scenario, the role of victim and victimizer are reversed. The creditor is seen as the victim, and the debtor is seen as the victimizer. The only thing wrong with that model, by the way, I think it does explain some forms of debt. The only thing wrong with it is that it's applied to the wrong social group, the poor. In fact, there are usually some profligate few who come from socially esteemed backgrounds and who live in a grand style, who cultivate that magic art of borrowing forever and ever and paying back never and never, as it's called. Such limitless credit, though, is more likely to be extended not to the poor farmer or laborer. It's going to be extended to those of gilded heritage. Caesar's efforts at easing the debt burden was designed to help not the profligate few, but the laboring masses. Cicero, for whom such reforms were tantamount to subversion and revolution, voices the fears of many of his class. Quote, "I foresee a bloodbath, an onslaught on private property, the return of exiles, and cancellation of debts." Cicero believed that Caesar would show no mercy in killing off the nobility and plundering the well-to-do. Unquote. In fact, Caesar showed remarkable clemency toward his enemies after the Civil War. In some instances, he spared the lives of those who then participated later on in the plot against his life. A number of historians argue that Caesar's intent was to attain and retain autocratic power. And so we even have that term, Caesarism. It's not used that often now. It's very much in vogue in the 19th century to mean autocracy. Well, actually, while he accumulated power, we should also look at how he used it. Toward what ends? Cui bono? Who benefited? I just gave you plenty of examples. Caesar himself said, quote, "I am sated with power."